This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so welcome back, guys, to a fresh new session on IFRS 9 impairment, model development, and validation sessions. So we'll just do a very quick recap of the discussions that we were having in the last two classes, and from there, what we'll do is we'll move on to talk about the key discussions for today, right? So before we move on, I'll just let me open up the brochure or the syllabus that we had so that we can streamline our discussions more to that. And then obviously, yes, there would be some interlinkages across the topics, but we'll try broadly to keep to the proposed framework that we had. Okay. So basically, we say that so as per the syllabus, we would be initiating our discussion with the type of banking products and portfolios, right? Whereas and followed by the introduction to credit risk regulatory frameworks, right? So what we had done is we had touched upon both of these concepts in the first two classes, right? So in the first class we had talked about the different regulatory frameworks like Basel. We had talked about CCAR, and we had made an initial distinction between the capital modeling and the provisioning model and the provision modeling, right? So over here, and in the last class, we had talked about a couple of products, right? We had used uh, the personal loan as an example, and we had explored the basic difference of treatment that that asset class goes through under IFRS 9 and the one that it goes through in Basel. So, how is it that one particular business product is differently classified under a capital model, and how is it separately treated under a provisioning model? Is something that we had seen in the last class, right? And from there we started moving into a very core concept, right? We started moving into a very core concept of Basel of IFRS 9, which is the definition of bad. So how differently is bad defined in Basel versus that in IFRS 9, and why is it? We also had discussed about, we had shed light on the fact that why is it that strictly given in IFRS 9 is not given. Right? That is what we have discussed. So these are the areas that we had touched upon in the last few classes. Right? And in today's discussion, we will take up, we'll start talking about the different banking products in details. But this time, we'll not be only, it's not that we'll be talking about only the business products per se, but we'll also be talking about its relevance to IFRS 9, its relevance to Basel, right? So, does all the asset classes which fall under Basel, do they qualify for treatment under IFRS 9? If yes, then how does that happen? So this is precisely what we are trying to discuss. Right? Right? So we in today's discussion we will be more or less focused on the key type of banking products, and we will be talking about the and gradually we'll go more deep into the portfolio, into the risk, the credit risk, and the regulatory frameworks. Right? Okay. And then gradually we come to talk about the income statement, the profit and loss statements, balance sheets. So these are concepts which we have already incorporated, right? So if you have a look into this, we have touched upon SPPI test in the last discussed. We talked about term loans. We had talked about receivables, right? So we had talked about, we touched upon the concepts in topic one and topic two till now. So in the first 2 days, we had done that introduction kind of a thing. In today's discussion, we will start our discussion from scratch in a more detailed fashion, right? So in a more detailed manner, we are going to introduce this. We're going to talk about the banking concept. We're going to talk about the banking portfolios and everything, right? Okay. So let's start by talking about the. Let's start our discussion with an introduction to key banking portfolios, the type of assets that they have, and the key differences in the classification between Basel and IFRS. Right. So this is what we would be focusing our discussion on in today's class. Right. So now, to many of you, this may sound familiar, this may sound known, but over here we will be looking into it the way in a different manner as to what we had looked into while we had done credit risk modeling. So over there, when we had discussed about these asset classes, we had talked about personal loans, we had talked about credit cards, right? But they were treated in a separate conscious manner. They were treated basis their exposures, their risks, right? So we'll see how differently are they treated under IFRS 9. So the approach would be we'll divide the bank's portfolio into two parts, retail and commercial. We'll see how the retail portfolio is defined under Basel. How is it? What are the asset classes? How are they respectively treated under IFRS 9, right? So that's going to be the approach. And over here, we will be covering up a lot of different kinds of, loans and loan products. So while people who have done the credit risk modeling module with me or who are doing it with me, you know that in that particular module we have a lot of focus on the retail products. Over here, we will be talking not only about the retail, but we'll be covering the commercial side of things in details as well, right? So that's where these two would be, this module would be a bit different, right? So let's start with an overview of the portfolio. Now, any bank's lending books are divided into two parts. So if I draw this, let's say this is the lending book of the bank. This is the lending book of the bank. And the lending book of the bank is divided into two parts. One is your retail books, the other is your commercial books. Retail. Commercial. So now the question comes out is that how do you define retail and commercial loans? How do you define a loan as retail? Generally, it is any portfolio is characterized by the total number of accounts that it has and the total exposure or the overall exposure that this particular portfolio would have, right? So now for retail, right, one very basic characteristic is that there are very large number of borrowers. Very large borrowers. In commercial, though the number of borrowers can be high, but it is very less relative to what retails have. Say in a retail portfolio, you can have anywhere around 3 to 4 million accounts, right? 3 to 4 million accounts, which are actually very important for model. So basically, you have 3 to 4 million accounts, and for the retail model development, those number of accounts are actually very important because as the while the number of accounts is very large in retail, the overall size of the exposures are very small. So the exposure, the average exposure or the per unit exposure of retail is that it is small. So what you have is a small exposure. So one thing that we have over here is the very large number of borrowers, and we have a small exposure. Now, very contrastingly, in a commercial portfolio, the number of accounts that you have is actually very large, whereas the number of Okay, so I just noticed a message from Nihal. He's saying experiencing audio issues from your side. So, guys, is everybody issuing this or having this issue? The audio issues? Am I audible to everyone?
Uh, Tanma, your voice breaks every now and then, but it's fine right now.
Okay. Sure. So it may be due to connectivity issues with GoToMeetings, and today GoToMeeting was having some kind of a problem as well. Okay, fine. Now, yeah, so now coming next to commercial portfolios. The story of commercial portfolios is exactly the opposite of a retail portfolio. In commercial portfolios, while the number of borrowers is relatively lower, right, the exposures or the average exposure per borrower is actually very high. So I'll say it has relatively lower borrowers, and what you have is high average exposure. Now, this characteristic between a retail and a commercial portfolio creates one advantage for retail modeling, one challenge for commercial modeling. Now, because each commercial loan is of a very huge exposure, therefore, the banks are actually so they are very conservative in lending out these loans. They look into the balance sheets, they look into the asset sizes and everything, and they put in all sort of controls which they can do to ensure the borrower doesn't go default or the loan doesn't go default. So over here, given that there are small number of relatively much smaller number of borrowers, the commercial portfolios tend to be very low default portfolios. right? So there need to be a separate strand of model development relating to low default portfolios, right? So over here, what we have is we have associated L, whereas with retail portfolios, this is the advantage. Since you have such a large number of operations, right, and you have let's say 70% of that. Therefore, I mean, even if you have a 7 to 8% of a bad rate, then even then the total number of bads in your model becomes very high, right? So you have sufficient number of bads in your model to go ahead and develop these models. So an added problem with commercial portfolio is a low default portfolio where the most famous methods of predicting the defaults, that is logistic regression, right? So the most low default portfolios is a confidence interval driven measure which is known as the Pluto-Tache method. The Pluto-Tache method of estimating probability of defaults, right? So what you have is a Pluto-Tache approach. Otherwise, mostly what we follow is the logic approach or the logistic regression framework. For retail portfolios, what we have is have the logistic regression. The logistic regression, right? So these are the two kind of models that we would be following about probability of default estimation for each of these respective portfolios. Now, before we move into the estimation side of things, let us try to understand what do these portfolios comprise of, right? Now, there are different kinds of products which can actually happen, or a retail can retail or a commercial product which can be designed to meet the needs of the customers. But the variety of products in retail is actually very limited, right? Uh, Whereas the commercial portfolios, in the commercial portfolios, what we get to see is that there are different kinds, so there are wide variety kind of products which are there, right? However, there are some forms of lending is actually very similar between the commercial portfolios and the retail portfolios. So we will be exploring each of them and we will be assessing the characteristics of these products from its accounting perspective, from the flow of so we will try to assess it from the cash flows that these assets would generate, right? So this is precisely what we are going to do in this particular session. Now, if I look into the Basel classification, right? Now, Basel classifies the retail asset as, or it classifies a retail asset into three groups, or rather broadly into two groups. Sorry, three groups. One is your qualifying revolving retail exposure, which comprises of revolving products or open-ended products like credit cards, overdraft facilities, etc. On the other hand, the second group of classification was the mortgage classification, which was a collateralized asset, and over there the bank gives loan for to a guy to buy homes, and that is backed up against the asset itself. And hence, what you have is what you have over here is the second asset classification, which is your mortgages, which is the second part of retail. And the third part of retail is your other retail as per Basel, which comprises of secured and unsecured loans relating to term loans like personal loans, automobile loans, etc. Now, if you think about the way Basel had classified these assets, Basel had done the classification basis the exposures, right, and the riskiness associated with exposures. Now, why is it that this form of classification has been followed by Basel? Because in QRRE, the sources of risk or the riskiness is very different from that of asset classes in the other retail type, right? So if you are given a credit card, right, you know that if you use it and you pay back, right? Now if you are using your daily retail I mean your credit card daily, a daily payment is being generated, or a monthly cash flow is being generated. However, when the borrower doesn't use the card, then he is not paying anything. So even though it looks something to a case uh, where the borrower is paying like the principal plus the interest, right? Why it looks like that? The next thing that is also important is that there may be days when no one returns back the money on credit card. So I have not used my credit card for the last 2 months, so I'll not be paying it over the last 2 months, and hence there can be discontinuity or a break in the cash flow patterns. So from here, just hold on a second, please. Okay, so talking about the credit cards or any such revolving products, we would see uh, that these kind of assets, they are so they are kind of an exception to the SPPI criteria that we had talked about in the last class, right? However, IFRS 9 does have an approach to treat these assets, right? Now, if you think about these retail or these revolving credit cards, you'll see that these exposures are pretty risky exposures, right? Why are these risky exposures? Because they are revolving in nature, right? So given that these assets are revolving in nature and that they are unsecured, so these are considered to be one of the most riskiest loans that the bank gives, and hence the annual percentage rate of the annual percentage interest or the APR on this on these kind of products is actually very high. Therefore, given that this or the revolving exposures are the highest form of or the exposures associated with the highest form of risk, therefore these are treated as a separate segment under Basel, right? So one thing we can see is that it's the riskiness associated with the exposure which dictates the classification under Basel. Because why? What is Basel trying to do? Basel, as a set of accords, is trying to keep aside capital, right? So it keeps aside capital to absorb the unexpected losses. Therefore, it aims to evaluate the riskiness of the assets, right? So that's one side of the story. Now, if I'm to think about credit cards from the IFRS 9 side, I need to understand it from the cash flows. Now, talking about the cash flows, we have already seen that, or what we've already discussed is that the cash flows may not be regular for credit cards. Hence, it has a special treatment under IFRS 9, to which we would be coming down, right? Now, let's come to the next second segment that Basel has. Now, Basel talks about mortgages. Now, mortgages, so what are mortgages? So, you buy a house, right? The bank gives you money to buy the house, and the bank registers the house in the bank's name for the time. So, it is hypothecated to the bank until you're paying the loan. Once you pay the loan, the bank hands over the house to you, right? And in between, if you are unable to do it, the bank uses that house to pay back the loan. So these loans are totally collateralized. Now, assuming that these are collateralized loans, these are loans of low risk, right? So as a borrower, what we do is, so even if you think about from the from the collections perspective or from the loss given default perspective, mortgage loans are pretty safe because you always have a certain amount of category. You always have a collateral which you can bank up, right? So that's one. The second thing is, if you think about mortgages, mortgages are the least risky loans from the probability of default perspective as well. Because if you think about it, that let's say there is a borrower who has three loans. He has a personal loan, he has an auto loan, and he has a home loan, right? And he pays a total, so he pays an EMI of 40,000 on the home loan, an EMI of 10,000 on the uh, an EMI of 10,000 on the car loan, and he pays an EMI of 8,000 on the personal loan. So if you add the three together, right, so what you get is the following. So 40,000 plus 10,000 is 50, and 8,000 is 58,000. So monthly EMI he pays to the bank is 58,000. Now let's say he loses his job, right? And now he has 50,000 to pay to the bank, right? So how he has only 58,000 to be paid as EMI. He doesn't have any more money. So what does he do? So what he does is the following. First of all, he pays the 40,000 of the home loan. Why? Because he knows that if he defaults on the home loan, he will be removed out from the house and it will be taken over by the bank. So that would directly impact his existence. So it is a collateralized loan, as well as the mortgage loans are also have a direct bearing on the life standard or the basic necessities of the individual, and hence he would obviously pay back the home loan. After that, he has the car loan. So what is how much does car loan does he pay? He pays a car loan of 10,000 every month. Now that he pays a car loan of 10,000 every month, so how does that work out? So why would he go between the personal loan and the car loan? Which one does he choose? Obviously, the car loan, because he knows that if he doesn't pay the car loan, the loan would be taken, the car would be directly taken away from him. So the first two loans that the guy would pay is the home loan followed by the car loan. Now, if he doesn't pay back the personal loan, that worst that happens is he goes into default, the personal loan, but that does not, if that only affects his score. However, that does not affect his existence because these are not his basic necessities. Therefore, if you have a personal loan, credit card, and a mortgage, or you have a personal loan, you have a auto loan, and say a credit card, auto loan, and a home loan, the least risky is your home loan, the next risky is your auto loan, the next risky or the most risky is your credit cards, right? So therefore, the way Basel had placed the assets in the different segments and subsegments was basis their associated riskiness, right? But when it comes down to IFRS 9, the approach totally changes. Right? So let's start with each of the assets that we have been talking about. We'll come to credit cards a little later, right? We'll start off with these two assets. First, we'll start off with a personal loan, and then we'll start off with a home loan or a mortgage, and we'll try to check that how does the classification, the asset classification change with respect to IFRS 9 for each of these products, right? So up to this point of the discussion, where I have, while I've been discussing the Basel classification, is this Basel classification and the logic for the classification clear to us?
Yes, Tanmay. So
Okay.
I had a question that mortgages loans are collateralized. So does that mean that collateralize and securitize the same terms which are used interchangeably?
See, for generally when we talk about mortgage, right? The term we use for it is collateral, right? So whenever we talk about collaterals in retail portfolio, we know we are talking about mortgage. So it's a jargon which is very specific to mortgages, right? Now for auto loans, we do not use the term collateral. We say that it is secured by the car that for which the lending has been done, right? So it is that way we just talk about. So it's just a jargonal difference. Whereas security and collateralization more or less similar in case of credit lending. However, securitization has a very specific meaning in the investment side of things, right? So when you're talking about investments and derivatives and securitized assets, so their securitization has a very specific meaning for investment bankers. However, for bankers like us on the who work on the lending side of things, not much of a difference is there.
So the basic idea between those two is same, that there is something which is with the bank in lieu to the loan which bank has given,
Yeah, yeah. So I can
which
actually,
can be
I have
used. Yeah.
something, I have a collateral which I can value at the present value and I can sell it off in case the borrower defaults. So for us, it's collaterals,
Okay.
right? And I prefer, I would suggest we stick to the usage of the word collateral to, to avoid unnecessary confusions, right?
Right. Right.
Okay, perfect. So let's move on. Fine. So yeah. So let's start with personal loan as a retail asset. So within retail over here, following are the assets that we are going to talk about. So the first asset that I talk about is personal loan. The first asset that we talk about over here is personal loans. The second asset that we talk about over here would be mortgages. Mortgage. Then the next thing that we talk about over here is So after having talked about mortgage, the next thing that we're talking about over here is auto loans. Auto loans. And the next thing that we talk about over here is ODs or overdrafts. So these are some of the things that we need to, or these are some of the asset classes that we generally would like to talk about. Right? So we have personal loans, mortgage, auto loans, and overdrafts. Fine. So let's start with personal loans. So how does personal loan work? Or first of all, what are the characteristics of a personal loan? The first characteristic of a personal loan is the term loan. Term loan. And the second is, so it means that it is taken for a fixed period of time. And the second is it's an unsecured. Now, if you look at it from this perspective, you'll see that personal loans tend to be more risky than mortgages because of the way this product has been created, right? So, if you look judging it from its risk source. However, what we want to understand over here is that how does a personal loan work? So first of all, there is a principal attached with the personal loan, right? So a loan is given. So there is a principal. The next is there is an interest, right? And the third is that there is a time or a term that we generally talk about. The term is the the number of months for which the loan has been taken. So it can be 12 months, it can be 24 months, it can be, 36 months, 60 months, whatever. Typically, a personal loan is generally taken for either 36 months or 60 months, right? So that's the standard that most of the banks generally offer. Now, how do I compute the amount on this? So the amount over here is principal into 1 plus interest, right? So interest is I, which is R by 100. So if interest is 5%, then it means it is 5 divided by 100, whole to the power of n. So talking about whole to the power of n, so this is the compound interest. So basically the interest itself compounds over some n number of months, right? Compounds itself once, so every 12 months or every 1 year. Then what you have is the principal, the amount that you would have is amount in principal to 1 plus r by 100 to the power of n, right? So that is what we have like kind of studied over here. Now, this amount that you have to pay it over a period of time, right? And what you do is you this entire amount is amortized over a period of these months. Amortized. So what is amortization? Amortization is a kind of depreciation. It's a concept which is very similar to depreciation, of physical assets. Like in physical assets, when there are depreciation, the amount by which it is depreciated is written off the books. And amortization schedule, the amortization is also the rate, it shows the rate at which a non-tangible asset is to be written off the books. Now, the personal loan is a non-tangible asset. You cannot see that asset in your house, right? You actually cannot see that okay, this is the amount of asset that my bank has. So you can calculate, but you cannot see it. So it's an intangible asset. You cannot feel that asset per se. So when you are writing off this asset over a period of time, then what you are doing is called an amortization. Yes.
Sorry, Tanmay, so what do we mean by intangible assets and in respect to personal loan?
So okay. So basically, say a tangible asset is a furniture which I buy, right? Or a physical production plant that I have. That's a tangible asset, right? As a manufacturing firm. Now, for a bank, what is a tangible asset? The bank doesn't have, do not have intangible assets, right? So the assets that a bank intangible assets.
So,
So the
but
personal
but
loan,
in case of a loan,
hmm,
but in case of a loan, when we buy a property, so that property is also a tangible asset, a
no,
just similar to
no.
furniture.
That's
But
a
in person,
collateral for the bank. The asset is the loan that the bank is giving
oh,
because the money that or the income that the bank will earn is not on that house or not on that collateral, but the income that the bank will earn is
okay.
on the cash flow, on the money that has been lent out, right?
So
So,
personal loan is personal loan is something in which the reason or the asset is which for which the loan is to be taken is not known.
so when you are applying for a personal loan, banks always do not ask you even the reason why you are taking a loan. You want a personal loan, they'll give you the loan. Why? So, how do we define an asset first of all? An asset is something which generates an income for you, right? So, for example, what is an asset for Apple? Now, it's not like they have their physical stock of inventory and everything, but what is their core asset? Their core asset is their intellectual property, right? The resources who are working over there, and that's an intangible asset, right? So you cannot. So basically, similarly for banks, or sorry, let's say for Apple, there's the intellectual property, right? So they are producing those goods which they're selling in the market, and then they are getting the money, right? So somewhere down the line, the core asset that they have is the human knowledge. Or let's say, for example, a service-based company, let it be Deloitte, or let it be PwC. So so what are they actually doing over there? So they are rendering the consulting services, right? So when they're rendering the consulting services, that service is getting them the money. So their asset is that intellectual property, those resources. Now that is an intangible property, right? You cannot take that and sell it in the market. So you cannot take your resource and sell him in the market to get a money or to make an income. So therefore, so what are you actually selling? You are selling their expertise. So that is where you have your human asset or your intellectual property. But that's an intangible property. You cannot touch that or you cannot see it in a physical terms. You can realize it in terms of revenues. Similarly, when the bank is lending the loan, right? Let's say the bank is lending a mortgage loan. Now the house is not earning any income for the bank. So the borrower is staying in the house, he's paying his EMIs on a monthly basis. And once the EMI is done, once the cash flow has been completed, the bank hands over the house to the borrower. But till then, the person is actually uh, paying back the money. So it's that loan which was given to this person to buy the house, which is generating the income for the bank. Hence, that loan is the asset for the bank. That loan amount is the asset of the bank. And that is a virtual money, right? So that's an accounting entry in the bank's balance sheet. Or that was a money that was transferred into his account. Or he could use funds up to that point. And he made a transition and the cash was given. So this loan itself is an intangible asset. Can you take the loan and sell it to the market? You can't do that, right? So it's not that it cannot sell a loan, but that's again a separate kind of a different story altogether, right? But if you want, you have a furniture, machinery or a plant, you take that, you go to the market, you sell that plant, right? So if I have a loan, I just cannot directly transfer the ownership of that loan without any specific reason or any good reason or something like that, right? So that's why loans are called intangible assets. And assets are something to an organization which generates a source of, right?
Right, right, fine.
Okay, great. Great. So over here, uh, okay, so this entire amount of the loan that the borrower needs to pay at the end of a certain maturity, right, is amortized, and that schedule is called an amortization schedule. Now, what does an amortization schedule mean? So, in an amortization schedule, you are writing off your principal and your interest at a given rate, and at each month, you're paying back some amount in form of an interest and the principal, right? And finally, your entire amount gets written off the book. And this amortization amount is a simple discounting process, and it comprises of two parts: your principal, and at each stage some part of the principal is being written off and some parts of the interest is being written off, right? And initially when you are writing off a loan, majority part of the EMI comprises of your interest, and the latter part comprises of your a larger portion of the EMI, the latter EMIs comprises of your principal. And this payment that I am doing, this equated monthly installment, is being paid every month. Hence, the cash flows from this particular asset is a contractual cash flow, right? Now, the question that comes, so this asset or this personal loans that we talk about is an asset under placed under amortized cost. It's an asset at which is valued at amortized cost. Excuse me, at amortized. So personal loans are assets which are valued at amortized cost, and because there is a monthly contractual payment, it also passes the contractual cash flow test or the SPPI test, so the principal, sole payment of principal and interest. And finally, what we get is we get to see that yes, impairments are of this asset, impairments for this asset, if any, can be treated under IFRS 9. Right. So you see that the way the same asset is treated under two different regulations is very different. While Basel classifies it basis its term and unsecured its security or its riskiness, IFRS 9 assesses it basis the way it is, basis the contractual cash flows that it generates. Right. So this is one group of asset, or these assets or personal loan is an asset which is okay. So over here, yeah. So the question that comes out over here is that how do I, you know, talk about this amortization? How do I compute amortization? Or how much do I need to pay? How do I compute that particular amount? Right. So there are two ways. So I one is so obviously yes, there is a formula for computing this amortized cost, right? And the second that you need to, the second way is to simply use Excel. So Excel nowadays has an application, inbuilt application within itself to compute amortization schedules, right? So I'll first use the Excel. I'll show you an overview of amortization, and from there I'll show you the formula and exactly how is it that this particular asset, or how is it that I would evaluate this asset under IFRS 9, right? So that's one discussion that we'll have. After this, we'll talk more about personal loans, right? And we'll talk about how is the PD calculation in personal loan different, or like how is the probability of defaults different in personal loans in Basel as compared to estimating probability of defaults under IFRS 9. So we'll come to that part shortly. But first, let's start off with the Excel sheet and let's see how the amortization is done. Just a minute. This is the loan amortization sheet. Just give me some time. It's taking time to download, right? So just give me a few seconds, right? I'll put myself on mute, let it get downloaded, and then we'll get started. Hi guys. Yeah. So over here you can see that this shows all the inputs that you require for computing an amortization schedule of a loan, right? So we are assuming that there are 10 payments, and as you go further down, you will get to see the others, right? So I have just so this is very simply it's done. Okay. So let's say uh, that the loan amount that has been done, that has been created over here, is 5,000. So I have taken a loan of dollar 5,000, right? Now, since it's a personal loan, I also have an annual interest rate which is 4%. Now, the loan period in years. So I have taken the loan for 1 year, and there would be 12 installments, right? The start date of the loan over here is so the start date is the 2nd of December 2018. So that means I will be paying the first installment in the beginning balance is 5,000, right? And over there I'll be paying on a monthly basis, and I'll be going along that, right? So there would be 12 EMIs, and from there it is, I mean, it would gradually be written off, and from there what we would do is we would find out at each stage what is the uh, amount that needs to be paid, right? So let's start. So over here, if you go through this, you'll see that there is an yes, there is a optional extra payment, and the scheduled payment is dollar 425 per year, right? So this gives you the EMI, or this is your EMI that is there, right? So the scheduled payments over here is 12, but the actual number of payments that has been done over here is 425. I mean, the actual number of payments has been done in 10 installments. And what you get to see is that the total early payments of $900 has been done, and the total interest is $89.62. So the loan summary has been provided. So this is your beginning balance, right? So over here, you start off with the given balance, and you compute your EMI. So this is the amount that is going to be paid for that's dollar 425, right? Now from there, now after this, so if you subtract this amount from this value, so what you see is, so this is a scheduled payment, right? But in the first month, this guy pays an extra amount of $100. So the total payment that they have made over here is dollar 525. Now out of this 525, you will see that it contains a principal of 509, right? And the interest of $16.67. So your total interest was 89.62. That is being equally written off over a period of time. So you see that the majority of the interest is being covered by the first 4 or 5 months, right? And then gradually it is actually going down. So whenever a loan is being amortized, the the EMI that you are paying, the initial installments are designed such that the principal contains more and interest is kind of less, right? I mean, interest contains a greater component, a greater part of the interest is charged, and principal contains the relatively smaller component. So interest is written off at a quicker speed, whereas principal is written off at a slower speed, right? So you can see that by the first, within the first 6 installments, right? The bank has recovered 74 rupees of the entire principal interest that was pending, and out of this dollar 5,000, it had recovered only dollar 1,000 of, it had recovered just how much of its total principal. Out of 5,000, it has covered only up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3,000 something, right? So therefore, what you can see is that the way amortization is done, a majority of the part of the principal EMI that you are paying is computed basis the principal, and majority of the component is interest and the remaining part is principal. So so at each stage, right? So at each stage, the ending balance is observed, right? So what you can see from here is that you started with 5,000 over here, right? But after you made a payment, this is the outstanding balance. The next day you pay this, the next time you pay this. So at each your loan amount, the asset is getting written off the books of the bank, right? Where it is not equally distributed, but the monthly payment that you are making, the total monthly payment you are making is constant, right? And finally, whatever remaining amount is left, that is given and it's closed. Right? So each month you are making a scheduled payment of 525, and from there, what you are actually getting is you are writing your assets of the. So this is what so this is the concept of amortization. Now the question that comes out is that how do I, if I'm doing an amortization exercise, right? I'm computing this scheduled payment. How do I compute the scheduled payment? Right. So what is the logic behind doing that? So this is, or what is the calculation approach of doing this? So from here we'll get, we need to understand this total amount and the total kind of so the formulae behind this. So in the next stage what we do is we look into the formulae behind this particular thing, right? So is this example that we have seen in this template, is this example clear? Any questions up to this point?
Yes, this is clear.
Great. Okay. Okay. Fine. So let us go back to the part of computing this amortization. So how do I compute the the payment amount that I need to make per period? So the formula for computing this is shows something like this. The amount that I need to pay per period is the principal. So the P is the principal that I have borrowed, right? So this is the amount of loan that has been given out divided by R into 1 plus R to the power of n. Over here, rate of interest R is the rate of interest per period. This R is not the rate of interest on the whole loan, but it is the rate of interest per period. So this is the rate of interest per period. Let's say there is a rate of interest of 10% on the asset, on the loan, right? Now, this 10% is being paid over 12 months. So every month you are paying an EMI, right? So the N over here is 12, and the rate of interest per period becomes 10% divided by 12. So 10% is 0.1. So 0.1 divided by 12 is your rate of interest per period. And over here, what I have is minus 1. So this is the typical formula that we have for finding out the amount that needs to be paid per period. Right? A stands for the amount paid per period. P stands for the principal over here. R is the rate of interest per period, and N is the number of payments. So over here, if you come down, you will see that. Now let's try to compute this formula, right? Okay. So let me just open another Excel sheet from here. So the principal amount over here is 5,000, right? So $5,000 principal is $5,000, right? The rate of interest, the nominal rate of interest I is 4% per annum. Then the next part is number of payments per year is 12. Number of payments per year is 12. Now, what is the amount that this guy is going to pay? So, first of all, we know that the amount is principal into this I. So, from this I need to compute the R. So, R is your interest per period. So, it is this cell divided by L. So, it is this value which is to be used. Now, first of all, what I'll do is I need to compute. So, what is the formula that we had looked into? It was r into 1 plus r to the power of n. In another step, I'll compute this 1 plus r whole to the power of n minus 1. We'll divide it and multiply it with p. We'll do it in a stepwise basis, right? First is r, the number of the rate of interest per period, into 1 plus r to the power of n. So let's go back. So this is this value into 1 plus r to the power of n. So this is the value, right? So this is what? This is r into 1 plus r to the power of n. The next part is 1 plus r to the power of n minus 1. So this is 1 plus r to the power of n minus 1, right? So over here, what the next thing that we do is this value divided by let's put it like this. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, 4, 5, 6. What is 5 divided by 6. So this is equal to 5 divided by 6. So what I need to do is do this principal into this. 45.75. So this value right back 45.7. You build. So this is how we create an amortization schedule, and every month, right? So say month 1, you have 5,000. Month 2, you have this minus. So what I'll do is, like next month, you will have this. the next month you'll have this, then you'll have this, this is one. So after you have paid what 12 months, so you have at the end you have 743 left. So you just go and pay that 743 at the end, 7 whatever is left, and finally your asset gets returned. And this gets returned off over a period of 1 month or 12 months. You see that for these next 12 months, you always have a contractual cash flow which comprises of the principal and the interest. Right? So this is how amortization is done for this asset, and hence this asset passes the SPPI test, and you get to apply IFRS9 impairment standards on this. Clear? Piyush, are there any queries that you have? I saw no that you would have typed. Any portion that you might not have understood? Okay, okay, great. Okay, okay, okay. That's fine, that's fine. Okay, perfect. So this is one of the assets that we have talked about, right? Now, similarly, if it's a mortgage loan as well, so you will have similar kind of calculations that we have done. So, so now the question that comes out is that so these assets, so a personal loan is an asset under uh, an amortized cost. Fine. The next question. So now the question that comes out is that that okay. So uh, so the question that comes out over here is that how do I assess the impairment of this particular asset? Now, if this asset is impaired, so before the asset is impaired, what I would like to do is I would keep aside a expected credit loss against it, right? And with this expected credit loss, we come across to IFRS 9's biggest contribution in exactly loss provisioning model frameworks. That is Okay, so so over here, what we would like to do is, so we have, so to provision against this impaired asset, right? So before the asset gets impaired, we need to keep aside the expected credit loss. And over here, IFRS 9 talks about, so IFRS 9 talks about two broad concepts of expected credit losses. Number one is the next 12 months expected credit loss. Next 12 months. And the next is the lifetime expected credit losses. The lifetime ECL. So these are the two broad concepts that we need to talk about. And while we go to talk about these two, right, the most important thing that crops up over here is the concept of the next 12 months period and the lifetime period. Because once you find out a way to estimate the lifetime period and the next 12 months period in IFRS 9, or half your battles are won, because your LGD is very easily understood, right? The loss given default and the exposure at default is easily understood. But what becomes most important over here is the next 12 months PD, the lifetime ECL PD, and so on.
Uh, Tanmay, I
Yeah.
have a question here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so basically, when we talk of this PD and EAD calculation, so this
Uh-huh.
the calculation of these two remains same for IFRS 9 and Basel. Only
Yes.
difference is that.
So the way you're uh-huh. No, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, the methodology to calculate PD and EAD would remain same for Basel and IFRS 9. Only the difference is that in IFRS 9, we need to identify whether it is to be calculated for 12 months or for lifetime.
Right. So when this difference comes in, so this brings in a lot of changes with it, right? Because when you are computing the next 12 months PD, your dependent variable is whether the borrower defaults in the next 12 months or not. But when you are talking about a lifetime PD, you bring in the concept of a lifetime survivor of the borrower. And that is where one of the most important methods of modeling which enters over here is the concept of survival analysis, right? So to estimate the lifetime PDs, this measure becomes very important. And in order to ensure that the PDs are forward looking in their calculation, in order to ensure that the kind of the PDs that we have, they are forward looking in their calculation. What we'll talk about, I mean, they're forward looking in nature. The macroeconomic variables also needs to be considered.
So when we talk of macroeconomic variables, I think most of the macroeconomic variables are not predictable, or maybe they are predictable. But what are the macroeconomic variables probably which we used
Mhm.
in practical to identify if the expected if
Yeah,
there is
so I'll
a,
come to that.
default
I'll come
happening
to
in the
that in
lifetime?
details.
O-
Right. So I'll
Okay.
come to that in details, but I just give you a sneak peek into the same. So basically, depending on each portfolio, there are certain macroeconomic factors which were, which impact the default rates. Now, one way through which you can, okay, so one way through which this works is, let's say, and let me talk about personal loans, right? Now, what is the macroeconomic variable which can impact personal loans or the default rate in personal loans? Now, who takes personal loan? Personal loan is mostly taken by your retail people, right? So retail salary classes or self-income individuals. Now, let's say there is a downturn in the economy, right? And when there is a downturn in the economy, there would be a contraction in the production sector. That is, the GDP in the economy would gradually start shrinking. So with the reduction in the GDP, the unemployment or the
So,
involuntary unemployment in the economy would increase, right?
so how do we
Now,
predict the so how do we predict the downturn in the economy or the GDP will be
okay,
lowered in future? It again
okay.
would be depend on
So
multiple. Okay,
no,
yeah.
so basically, every economy has its own downturn definitions. Okay. So there are downturn scenarios which are there, which are present, right? And based on that, we define the downturn in an economy. Let's say, for example, historically, we have seen in India over the last, say, if I start from the year 2003 onwards, 3 to 18, over the last 15 years, we have seen that the average GDP in India has been fluctuating kind of somewhere between 7 to 9%, 6.5 to 9% of GDP, right? So that's been the broad band of GDP movements. Now, suppose if you look into the 2008 period, right, you will see that there is a sudden sharp dip into the GDP, right? Along with that, the moment the GDP goes down, so there are other parameters which also shoot up, and they shoot up by certain percentages. On an average, the movement up and down movement is by on a certain average percentage. But during downturn, that the fall that happens would happen by a greater percentage, right? And that gives you your downturn definition. So every economy has its own downturn definition. You cannot generalize on that. But there are certain characteristics of downturn which are common all across the nation, right? So one is GDP. GDP is a very important measure. Now it depends on whether, so how you look into GDP. Ideally, we should be looking into real GDP that is there. The GDP is adjusted to the price levels, right? Now, once that part is sorted, once we have seen that part, then we look into the unemployed part. So first of all, when you're based on the product, you create a theory of your own, right? You first create a theory. You know how the product works, how the portfolio works, and how does the portfolio react to changes in these macroeconomic factors. You do have a knowledge of that, given that you are a bank who has been submitting stress testing results for 10 years now. So you have an idea of that, and based on that, you create your framework first. So you select out the relevant variables and you pass them through variable selection procedures. So through a specific variable selection procedure, you look into the trends, you look into how their behavior has been, and how should their behavior be. So it's always an actual versus expected kind of a relationship that happens, right? Now, once that part is sorted, then so once you know, okay, these are the variables, say GDP, unemployment, rate of interest are the important variables, right? Or say let's say GDP and unemployment are the important variables which affect my personal loan portfolio, right? Now the next question is you need to identify the lags. Which are the most significant lags which impact the default rates? Now once you have
Uh,
identified that,
and
yeah.
Tanvir, just sorry for
Mhm.
interruption. Another question
No,
here.
no, please tell
So
me.
so when we talk of
Hello.
natural calamities, like there is any thing like there is a flood, so that would totally be into operational risk, right?
Yeah, so
Because of a,
those are
let's say,
not
because of
our
a
concern.
flood.
See, because I cannot. Yeah, floods and calamities are something which is outside the scope of my analysis. I will be using only those variables based on whose past patterns I can predict the future. Now, a calamity occurred 10 years before does not mean that the next calamity will occur 10 years from the time when I'm standing. right? So it can occur at any point of time. So those are parts which is totally outside the scope of my analysis,
Okay, okay.
right? So
Yeah.
I'll come to this detailed discussion on macroeconomic variables and lifetime period, right? So at this point, just let me introduce these concepts. So how am I doing and when am I computing the lifetime period? When am I computing the next 12 months period? So I'm just into these basic discussions right now, and gradually I'll just go into it because given that this is the third session only. So over the next couple of sessions, I might be kind of building it up for the discussions, right? So I'll just come down to that. Okay, so over here, so talking about the next lifetime. So basically, what we'll talk about is the next 12 months PD and a lifetime, the next 12 months ECL, lifetime ECL, and we'll start our discussion about the next 12 months PD and the lifetime PD, right? So over here, to distinguish, so the first question that comes out is that we do understand what these two PDs mean, and I mean the overall understanding is clear from the very description. The next question that comes out is that when do I compute a next 12 months PD and when do I compute a lifetime PD? And that is where IFRS 9 brings in the concept of staging. This is where IFRS 9 says that you need to appropriately stage your accounts. This is called the staging analysis. Staging analysis. And this is where the next big question comes in, that how do I stage my accounts into stage 1, 2, and 3? So how do I stage these accounts? Stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. So these are the two broad or the two most important parts of, or this is the most important portion of IFRS 9. So let's consider what is stage 1. So stage 1 accounts are those accounts which are non-delinquent in nature, right? So these accounts have never been into delinquency, and as on the snapshot month they are current, right? The second that comes out over here is the stage 2. In stage 2, the accounts have undergone certain credit deterioration, or as we call it, they have undergone a significant increase in credit risk in stage 2. So if an account undergoes a significant increase in credit risk, then he needs to be placed into stage 2. So this is called our SICR criteria. Question that comes out is that how do I identify the significant increase in credit risk?
Uh,
Yeah, tell me. Significant
Yeah. So
increase.
Tanmay, when we talk of a credit deterioration or when we talk, yeah. So when we talk of a
Mhm.
credit deterioration or when we talk of a any kind of like any kind of like a change in the credit
Profile
in
of
the
the
profile
borrower.
of a customer. Yeah, profile of
Yeah,
a
so that
customer.
is,
So
yeah,
in
that is,
both cases, yeah,
yeah, please go on, please go on.
yeah. So
Yeah,
in
go on.
that case, so in both the cases, we would be doing this analysis.
Yeah, so whenever I see that a
So,
borrower in my
so
portfolio has undergone a
yeah.
significant increase in credit risk. So it means that if he is undergoing a significant increase in credit risk, what it vis-a-vis means is that this borrower has undergone a credit deterioration, right? So this borrower has undergone a credit deterioration. So I need to measure that credit deterioration.
So when we talk of stage one, stage two, and stage three, we are talking about a particular customer which has whose credit capability has deteriorated, or is it asset which has actually devalued
No,
from
see,
past?
stage one contains accounts which are good accounts. So these are non-delinquent accounts, right? When an account moves from stage one to
So
stage
account.
two, so when an account moves from
So
stage
by
one to
accounts we
stage two,
mean that, yeah.
Anshu, just let me finish this, then I'll take the question up. Okay, that will be easier. So
Okay,
you
okay.
once you get my third, it would be easier for you to take it up. Okay, guys, am I audible to you? Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, fine. So borrowers in stage one, let's say my portfolio contains 1,000 accounts, right? Out of this, some accounts are non-delinquent. So accounts which are non-delinquent, who have not entered into delinquency, is my stage one accounts. Now from stage one, there are some accounts which have undergone a deterioration to stage two. Now, when you are in stage two or when you deteriorate to stage two, it means that something has happened which has caused your credit risk to increase, right? But you are not an impaired account, so you have not hit your default definition. So you are delinquent. You may have missed out one or two payments, but you have not hit the bad definition, right? So if you have not hit the bad definition, so you are in stage two. Now, if you further undergo a deterioration and you get impaired or you satisfy my impairment definition, that is my bad definition, default definition, then you are in stage three. So accounts which are in stage two are provisioned using lifetime ECL, and accounts which are in stage three are provisioned using they are also provisioned using lifetime ECL, but for some accounts which have been in impairment for quite some time, 100% impairment is kept basis IAS 39 standards, right? So we need to justify, we need to understand the criteria as to where a account is migrating from stage one to stage two and from stage two to stage three. So that is what we need to understand, right? Now Anshu, please put your question.
Yes, so my question is like, let's say there are two things. There is a deterioration in the credit risk. So does that mean that the customer is become more delinquent, or is it the value of the asset which was priced? Let's say this is for a mortgages, and the value of the mortgage has actually become more credit risky,
No, no, no,
or
no,
is
no.
it that
See,
the
if the value of the mortgage is becoming, if the say suppose there is a downturn in the housing market, right? So in that case, the value of the house goes down, right? Now, this will be a worry to the bank only if the borrower defaults. Then that would impact their LGD. That does not impact the PD. Staging criteria are solely looked into from the increase in the credit riskiness associated with the borrower. Now, if the borrower is
Okay.
unable to pay back an installment, say two successive installments suddenly, then you know that he has undergone a credit deterioration, right? So, credit deterioration is essentially understood from the delinquency side of the borrower.
So in both cases, those like the credit profile of a borrower and the value of a asset or a mortgage or a collateral are directly proportional to each other.
No, not necessarily. Because whether the
Or
housing
let's say,
price,
okay,
whether the equity value of the house goes up or it goes down, that is not impacted by the borrower's payments, right? So the borrower bought a house for 40 lakhs, right? Now,
yeah.
when the housing market is expanding, that the equity value of that house worth 40 lakhs is today it's 55 lakhs, right? But that does not impact the capability of the borrower. The borrower doesn't pay 55 lakhs. The borrower has to return 40 lakhs over a period of time. Correct. So the
Or let's say for an
borrowers,
example, or let's say for, okay.
yeah. So
Yeah, let's say
the
for an example, if a borrower has some sources of income from rental income, and the
okay,
value of a property which he on which he has taken a loan, that value decreases. So
right,
ultimately, the prices of the rental income will also decrease, and hence by
yeah.
resulting in the income of
But
the borrower.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is that if the borrower already has someone who is paying him a given rent, right? So that rent remains fixed up to a given point of time. That's one. Second is when the borrower is being acquired on the books of the bank. When the borrower is being acquired on the books of the bank would obviously assess the primary source of his income. Let's say I am giving you a house, bank is giving me money to buy a house worth 40 lakhs, and I plan to put in a rent, and the EMI is 20,000, right? Now I assume that okay, I can get a rent of 50,000 from that house, and I can actually pay back 20,000 to the borrower, to the bank every month. Now, when this person is reporting his income at the acquisition stage, the bank is assessing that, right? So the bank will check whether the primary source of the borrower is rental income or not. Now, if that is the case, the bank knows that this is an inherently risky borrower. Then, depending on the scorecard or on the strategies that the bank has for such income earners, they will decide it accordingly right at the time when the borrower is acquiring the books of is being acquired on the books of the bank. Right. Now, what you are saying is a very special case
I
where
got it.
the price of the mortgage, the equity price of the mortgage is related or is correlated to the income source. But suppose, say, I buy a house, right? I work for a company, I buy a house, I put it on rent. Now, even if the housing price goes down and if I have to charge a lower rent, that does not impact the bank because the bank knows that it is giving me the loan against my salary. So that does not impact. So that all these cases are taken care of at the acquisition stage. So once your acquisition stage is done and you are onboarded on the books of the bank, then any factor
Okay.
which impacts your repayment capacity adversely is the factor which causes a significant increase in your credit risk.
Tanmay, I have a
Tanmay,
question.
Yeah, Neha,
Okay.
tell me.
So when we talk about this credit deterioration, what sort of analysis do you do? What sort of time period is
Yeah,
considered? I
yeah, I'm
understand
just
that.
coming to that. I'm coming to that. So when I talk about the staging analysis, I'll be talking about all the relevant analysis over there.
Tanmay, a quick question here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm getting a lot of echoes. So others can just be on mute while Pradeep says.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
Pradeep, go ahead.
just a quick question. So when we are assessing the credit worthiness of a borrower, we are not considering his future earning capacity, right? The reason why I'm asking this question is because the question before this, was trying to understand if the rental income which the person is would be earning after he gets the property
Okay.
will or will not be considered. So connected to that, I thought that this would be
Yeah. So
the
what you are
question.
saying makes sense.
Yeah,
So that makes sense. So that is the reason why, Pradeep, when acquisition is done, right? Not only your income, but the source of your income is also becomes an important variable in an acquisition scorecard or in other part of the KYC, right?
hmm.
So suppose let's think it like this: that I work for a government organization. Say I work for the RBI, right?
Hmm.
Now I
Hmm.
am taking a personal loan. Now what I'll do is I'll buy the house and I put a rent over there, a tenant over there. That's my plan. Now for the bank sees, okay, what is the source of this income of this guy? So let's say so I have 50,000 rupees as a employee of RBI. There is another guy who wants 50,000 rupees just by renting houses, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Now, obviously, I am a less risky borrower to the bank because the bank knows that no matter what the situation is, I will not be losing my job.
Correct.
But the future repayment capacity of the second customer may get adversely impacted, given that housing prices drop,
Correct. Correct.
right? So in that case, it's not only the income but also the sources of income. Like even if it's not rental. So when a bank is giving a loan or a credit card or anything, they look into the employers, right? And every bank
Correct.
has an approved list of employers, and which keeps on changing with changing the riskiness of the industry, with everything. So
Right.
from that perspective, the bank already takes into account the riskiness that is there,
Correct. Correct.
right?
Okay.
So all these
Okay.
challenges are taken into account when you are being acquired on the books of the bank. So after acquisition has been done, it is only if your repayment capacity undergoes a deterioration that will be reflected in the SICR criteria.
Correct. So basically, the profession of the borrower is of importance. If it's a
Yeah,
professional
yeah.
like a doctor or a
The
lawyer,
source of the income, the
yeah.
source of the income.
Okay. Okay.
Right? So let's say for example, I was working in the Middle East markets, right? Now, most of the banks that I work for, now they have their list of approved list of employers, right? Or their certified list of employers, something like that they used to call it. And within there was a list of around 2,000 employers across the Middle East along with their industries. And out of that, construction industry, oil industry, and there was another industry which was marked as high risk employers. Because when a downturn hits the economy, these are the companies which suffers the most. Because with the downturn, when downturn hits the economy, the demand contracts, right? So oil companies are the first one to lay off, right? So you may give a credit card to a very prospective employee at the when the economy is at the helm and it's performing fabulously. But when downturn hits, this is the employee who is the most likely of getting being laid off from his organization. So this giving loan to this borrower is very risky. So you need to actually assess that how safe this borrower is. Does this borrower have sufficient amount of money to pay me back the the limits even when he loses his job? So when an economy starts going to a downturn, these borrowers who are treated as high risk accounts, right? And their limits and everything are worked around with. So this is a very critical. So this industry and the employment source is a very critical variable in any acquisition strategies, especially for the retail sector,
Sure. Sure. Thanks.
right? Okay. Okay, great. So the next part, so as I was coming into this, so we need to understand the stages. So stage one is where the borrowers are non-delinquent. These are the good borrowers of the bank. The CD0 borrowers that we had identified last class. Then when the account or when the borrower undergoes a certain loss of, his repayment capacity undergoes a loss, the next thing that happens over there is as follows. So the next thing that happens is, you go, once a borrower goes delinquent, he is, or once his repayment capacities undergo a significant deterioration such that the credit risk increases significantly, he is moved on to stage 2, and from there onwards lifetime ECL is computed for this guy. Now, when the borrower further deteriorates and he hits the bad definition and he becomes a bad borrower, say 90 days past due or whatever the bad definition is, he is flagged as an impaired borrower. That's the impairment flag. And from there, it is stage 1, and this borrower moves from stage 1 to stage 2, stage 2 to stage 3. At stage 3, the borrower is impaired, right? And lifetime ECL is computed, because when an account hits stage 3 very fresh, when it's a very fresh account in stage 3, there are hopes of it being de-recognized and flowing back to stage 2 and then to stage 1. So at lifetime ECL is computed. However, there can be some accounts which are already there in stage 3 for long, right, and they hardly have any chances of going back. So a full impairment on these accounts are charged as per the IAS 39 requirements, right? So this is what the framework is. Now, after this, the next discussion that comes up is, how do I identify this significant increase in credit risk? Because the key to the staging criteria is significant, assessing the significant increase in credit risk criteria, right? Now, there are multiple criteria to talk about significant increase in credit risk. So let's do something. Let's put a pause over here for the day, right? Let me share over the recordings with you, the 3 recordings of the classes, right? And then what we'll do is we will go through these 3 recordings, and then I'll start with significant increase in credit risk identification, those methodologies, approaches, right, for personal loans especially, and how ECL is computed, what are the kind of variables that would come in the PD calculation, and how would they be PIT, how would they be forward looking, and so on. And after that, we'll move into mortgage, auto loans, etc. Right? So let's stop here for the day. Let's finish this part. I'll share the recording. Also, I'll be sharing out. Toon had reached out to me regarding study materials. I'll be sharing out reading materials so that you guys can be prepared for the next session of the workshop. Right? So thank you guys. I'll take a pause here for the day. Have a great week ahead. I'll try to share the recordings as early as possible, and from there we will take it up.
Thank you, Tanu.
Right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you guys. Bye bye.